Hi, thank you very much for being here. We're here today to talk about people. And our thesis is that founders worry a lot about their burn rate, but they probably don't worry enough about their burnout rate. And that means talent, retaining talent as you scale in a really big way. I'm Michael Stothard. I'm the editor of SIFTED, which is a new Financial Times-backed media writing about the European startup world. We think it's the most exciting story going on, and we want to cover it in a very serious way. But with us, more importantly...
Obviously, much more importantly, right?
To discuss this, we have an extremely esteemed guest. We have Anna Binder, who is the head of People Operations, is her title, at ASANA. ASANA probably doesn't need much introduction from yourselves. It's an incredibly good workplace and team management platform. I use it. I'm sure lots of you use it. It is a company it's a software used by enormous companies all over the world. It is a startup that's scaling incredibly fast. And Anna is therefore in a unique position to talk about the challenges of scaling and of retaining talent, etc. So I wanted to start with quite an interesting and exciting angle on this, which is burnout, and how you assess it and how you combat it. So Anna, I mean, the first question is, how much of an issue in super scaling, blitz scaling companies, how much of an issue is burnout?
Thank you. Great to be here. I mean, I think it's a real problem, right? I think especially for early stage companies where you're trying to get product market fit, I mean, that is so difficult. It's like getting a pig to fly. And it's very, very hard to prioritize. So the natural response is, I'm just going to do more faster, talk faster, work faster. And I think that there's a lot of pressure from the marketplace, from each other, from investors to do that. And I also think that there's a strange sort of bravado and culture, especially in Silicon Valley, around prideful, I'm working 12 hours a day, or so the good news is, if we had been sitting up on this stage 10 years ago, the topic would not have been, how do I avoid burnout? It would have been, how do I do more faster?
And so what tools at Asana have you used, what techniques to avoid burnout and make sure that people are working extremely hard, but in a sustainable way?
Yeah. So for context, I joined Asana when we were about 150 people. On Monday, we were proud to announce that we have 500 people. So I've seen that growth over the past 3 years. First, a few things. We acknowledge that what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to build does take a lot of work and is really hard, and the expectations on ourselves as employees are high. That said, we believe in something called the sort of work-rest fractal, which in short means when you're working, focus, work hard, do the things that you need to do, don't get distracted, and when you're not working, when you're resting, really rest. How that manifests itself is a few different ways. The first, when I was 1 week in at Asana, one of the things that I noticed is that over the weekend, I didn't get any messages. There were no messages over the weekend. And I came in and I talked to Dustin Moskovitz, our CEO, and I was like, he said, well, so what are your early impressions of the company? And I was like, well, I didn't get a single message for 2 days. He said, that is by design. You are supposed to get a lot during the week, and you're supposed to take off. Another way that we try to encourage this sort of work hard, rest hard is, and something I practice is, if you go on vacation for 1 week, it's easy to just go on 80% vacation and 20% work, right? To get a few things done, to be responsive to your team, to call into that one important conference call. But if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, or dare I say 3 weeks, you actually really have to get organized. You have to line up your things. You need to make sure that your team knows what to do and how decisions get made, and that there's somebody operating in your stead, and that really allows you to turn off for those 2 weeks. So I'm a big fan of the 2 or 3 week vacation. The next thing that we do is we have something called No Meeting Wednesdays. And it is what it is. It is exactly as described. As a company, on Wednesdays, we have a rule of no meetings. So there's no standing meetings, there's no team meetings, there's no one-on-ones. Now, there's still a lot, so stepping back, that allows for you to actually get your work done, right? You're not just rushing from Monday morning to Friday afternoon of meetings. You get to take one day where you get to get in your zone and do actual work.
Do you think that the next step is getting people's mobile phones turned off, mandatory off mobile phones from after 6 p.m. and during the weekends?
So I'm not a big fan of mandatory. I believe that it's my job to create a culture where people know what they are responsible for, where leadership means prioritization and not do more faster. But I guess as a working parent and sometimes a single parent, I sometimes need to take an entire morning off or want to take an entire morning off to go to my daughter's school and just hang out on the floor with her and her friends, which means that after I put her to bed that night, I'm going to do some catch-up work. So saying, mandatory 6 p.m. off, I don't think is the right answer. I think that the right answer is creating a culture and and showing leadership around, hey, these are your goals, and here's why they're important, and you need to figure out a way to get them done. If it takes more than a reasonable amount of time, then we need to have a conversation. But I don't want to police when you do the work.
So we've talked a little bit about burnout, but what about keeping a company culture alive and vigorous at a time when you're hiring, basically, doubling your staff to, more than doubling your staff to 500 people? I read there's a really interesting concept that you have about treating company culture like a product. I like the idea. I don't quite know what it means. Can you
good.
Explain? It sounds lovely, but can you explain it?
So first of all, our founders we're a product-led company. Our founders are product people. So it's a very natural thing to say, well, if we're thinking about designing and building the culture, and what does that mean, to follow a product development methodology. So the first thing it means is we start with the end user in mind. What kind of culture do we want to create? What kind of culture do we think it's going to take to allow us to achieve our mission? So thinking about what that end user experience is, and that is very much about our employees, but it's also about connecting our employees to the customers. So one, begin with the end in mind. Second is using that end experience as the goal. We design the programs, we think about the elements, and then we build and implement them. As we build and implement them, for example, a feedback cycle or an all-hands scheduling or a compensation program, whatever it is, or how our management philosophy, we then build it, we plan communications about it, we roll it out. And then, and this is probably the most important thing, which is really what makes it like a product, which is we use something called the voice of the employee, and we look for lots of different ways through that voice of the employee to get input onto our people programs. And that allows us to identify bugs. So the voice of the employee includes things like a people operations board that provides us input on a weekly basis. It includes the engagement survey where we get feedback from all employees 3 or 4 times a year. It includes exit surveys from people who've decided to leave the company, and there's nothing like the honesty that comes from when somebody is resigning. So we use all of those inputs to identify the bugs in our culture, and then we talk about those bugs and we iterate and change from there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess related to this culture as a product issue is, can you give us a flavor of some of the other ways in which you try and maintain the culture you started out with, but when you're scaling at such an extraordinary rate?
Sure. So the culture and the artifacts of the culture that were relevant when we were 10 people or 50 people or 100 people, some of them are going to grow with us and some of them need to change. You know, one of the things that I say is that we've hired these amazing people. They do great work. That means we are more and more successful, which means we're growing, which means we're changing, and change is hard. And for anyone that's been in a startup knows, I mean, that's a fancy problem because you can also go the other way, and that's a much more difficult story. So we try to be very, eyes wide open that some things are going to need to change. The next thing I'll say, and I don't know how else to say this, but I think that the reason we have a culture that is scaling and a powerful culture that is scaling is because we spend a tremendous amount of time on it. If I look at our executive team meetings, we meet once a week for an hour and a half. I would say probably 50% of our time is spent on either people or culture-related topics. It's not something that is sort of the job of human resources or the job of some people who are interested in planning events. Culture, we believe that culture is core to our business success, so we spend time on it.
We've got an interesting question here on the board. Is this how ASANA competes for talent against the GAFAs? Well, the question is, how does it compete for talent against the GAFAs, against the big companies? Is this work-based culture one of those ways?
Absolutely. Remember, there's lots of different components of the culture. One of the components of the culture of a fast-growing startup, and this is at ASANA, but also at your company, is that you have the opportunity to have tremendous impact on the product, on the go-to-market motion. You know, your individual contribution has impact, and you have large amounts of autonomy in doing that work. That's not something that is as easy to say if you're at a 20,000 person company or even a 5,000 person company. But to us, culture is not only makes us competitive for talent, but allows us to achieve our mission.
Yes.
There was one other question in here about the sabbatical. So ASANA offers a 6-week sabbatical at the 3-year anniversary. This is very unusual in the United States for a company at our size and scale. And we believe, this is definitely part of the work-rest fractal because allowing yourself, 3 years working hard is a long time, and sometimes you just need to take a break. So we encourage employees to take it. Almost everyone takes advantage of it. And they go and do lots of different things, whether it's just resting or recharging or working on a research project that's related to their career, or just going and frankly sitting on a beach. But I think it's a really important part of that reset.
Yeah. So we talked about scaling and maintaining company culture, but what about hiring process, which obviously you're very involved in? What about the hiring process as you scale? What kind of tips and advice can you give to the startups out here on that?
Yeah. I think at the beginning, when you have a startup, your main focus is let's just hire as many great people as quickly as possible. That's the right thing for that early stage. But you get to a point, for us it was at about the 150 point, where you have to actually put systems in place in order to hire well. Not only to hit your targets and have some predictability around your roadmap, but also to ensure that you're making good decisions and that you're doing so in a way that attracts diverse talent to your organization, and you're not just hiring people that look and feel and smell just like you. So we made that shift. We started that shift at about 150 people. There's a few different things that we did. One, we Well, we just started using systems and metrics and tools, and we said each recruiter and each team can historically hire this many people. Well, if we need to, it's a simple math problem. It's a sales funnel, right? If we need to hire 25 people a quarter, that means we need this many recruiters. That means we need to contact this many candidates. We need to have this many interviews, and keeping ourselves honest with watching those metrics, which is a very different thing than let's just do as much as possible as quickly as possible. Another thing that we did was really thinking about hiring managers as talent magnets. So there's a tremendous amount of competition for great talent. One of the reasons that people join a company is for the mission and the work, but they also come because they want to come work for you. And what that means, I'm not saying everybody needs to be on stage or have a Twitter account, but really we asked each one of our hiring managers to have a point of view about management, to invest heavily in talking to candidates and convincing them why one individual with their one wild and precious life might want to come work for them, while we focused on the company piece. A final thing that we did was, there's this concept of cultural fit, and we got pretty maniacal about defining what that is. And we translated, well, if you're a cultural fit, you have values alignment, and we test that by these 7 questions, which is very different than me sitting down with you and interviewing you and saying, he seems like a good guy, let's hire him, and calling that cultural fit. I think that's terrible.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And then just a final question. There's a nice question from the audience here about where you get your inspiration from. Who do you admire? Who inspires you? Who are you trying to mimicking in your philosophy of building a culture while you scale?
So I 100% believe that the culture that we've built at ASANA is unique to ASANA, and it is very connected to our mission. So there's nothing, I can't say, oh, this one company, but I think that there's I look to our customers and I think about some of the things that they're doing, and then I think about the individual activities that they're doing and saying, how can this apply to me and our company at ASANA? And so I pick and choose from a lot of different places and customize it in a way that's for us.
Well, that's fascinating. Thank you so much, Anna. Can we give a round of applause to Anna for her great insights? Thank you so much.